My name is Mary Gray, and I'm a senior principal researcher at Microsoft Research. I'm trained in anthropology, and I'm a media scholar, and most of my work focuses on what do people do with technologies once they land in their everyday lives, and particularly for people who don't tend to have easy access to technologies. So people who live in rural parts of the United States, in parts of India where there isn't good connectivity. So any place where we might not be thinking they're the typical technology user. So Ghostwork is a 5-year study with computer scientist Siddharth Suri, thinking about what does the world of work look like when you can bring technologies to the task of sourcing, scheduling, managing, shipping, and billing just about any kind of service around the world at any moment. And it started out of an interest of understanding what are the kinds of jobs and occupations that would be automated away. And it quickly turned into a study of thousands of workers' experiences of both training artificial intelligence, but more often than not are stepping in and playing the role of artificial intelligence when it falls short, when it can't do the job. From what we uncovered from our research, there are often plenty of cases where a well-intentioned programmer put a code together to be able to instruct somebody, think of a recipe, giving them a step-by-step set of instructions. And the person who generated that set of instructions changes their mind about what they need, or they're really not that clear on what they need. And so what we need to be aware of is how that will generate a set of responses from somebody doing work that may not meet somebody's demand as the person making those requests. And in that case, the person who did that work did it in good faith and did due diligence. And so what are the obligations to that person when we know the code fails? It fails as a boss. It fails to understand data when it's just collected but isn't interpreted and shaped by human hands. So I think anytime we're dazzled by the amount of data that's spilling all over, we should be aware that it's somewhat meaningless, oftentimes incredibly devoid of any value until humans are in the mix doing something with it. And the accountability cuts both ways, that there's no point at which we get to detach from our responsibilities to each other just because code has stepped in to tell us what to do. Could say, and again, these are well-intentioned people. Most of them are trained in computer science and engineering. They have the wrong tools for the job. And so in those moments when they are mostly in response to what they imagine as customer demand, acting as social scientists, behavioralists, they don't always know that there are other tools they could bring to the job that would make it more likely that they're going to attune what they build to what people already need, or what are the social circumstances where that technology is going to enter. So for example, and I love thinking about how often some of the earliest technologies we ever built, like video, that where we learned how to compress video, that's a programmer figuring out how do I make video deliverable. Often it was built with the idea that everybody was sitting on the same kind of connectivity, access to the internet, as the person who built it. And so until enough people, including those engineers and computer scientists, started thinking, oh, when I compress video files, I actually have to be thinking about the equivalent of a dial-up or spotty, I've got 1 bar, and that's effectively what a person is going to be using to download video. Why does that matter? If you start building out technologies like the ability to download any course for learning how to do programming, and you don't think about, oh, for the people who would have really constrained access, would have very limited connectivity to the internet, I'm going to have to build file formats that are even more compressed. I might have to build file formats that assume it's not coming from the cloud at all. It's being passed around by a jump drive. You build differently. And that's the place where computer scientists and engineers do not have to learn all these tools. They're literally disciplines: anthropology, sociology, critical race studies, gender studies. All of these disciplines, history, tell us how to think about people's social situations. What are the ways in which they're going to be picking up particular technologies to help engineers and computer scientists build with those circumstances in mind? That those really matter. So if we think about at what point it feels okay to learn from what workers are doing and to be able to incorporate those insights into work practices, we have a really particular model in mind, particularly for human resources professionals. We're often thinking about a full-time employee where the rights of an employer, an enterprise, to be able to learn from what are my workers doing so I can improve my process. It's fairly clear that they have a right to look at teams who are interacting and to figure out what's that workflow. Fast forward now, where we've got so much permeability to the boundary of a firm. We don't just work within firms. We work with supply chains. We have teams that are scattered around, often the world, that are across full-time employees and reach out to consultants. And I think the greatest challenge to us now in enterprise settings is that we've encouraged everyone and anyone to come to work with their personal device and merge work life and home. So what do? So I would suggest that we really think very seriously about a need to redefine what are our workplace rights. Because in any case where we start collecting data without having clear permission from a worker, we are breaching what I would argue is a fundamental human right to not be surveilled. We would never accept, a firm coming into our bedroom and saying, I'm really curious about your sleep habits because I think they're affecting our workplace. So we really have to take seriously that now, more than we've ever had a chance, because of that deluge of data, we really could see those sleep habits. I think the moment is right for us to think about the equivalent of a data protection act for workers' data. And let's let go of thinking whether they're full-time employees or contract workers, because particularly when it comes to process, there's something incredibly special, but also deeply social about how people interact to create an output, an outcome for a business, that I would argue is the thing we're protecting when we say we're not collecting any data on what you're doing. And if we want to collect data on what you're doing, we're going to ask first in all cases. And if we generate any profit from learning your process, you share in those profits. So we've got to move out of a place where we're thinking what workers produce is a widget that's tangible and sold on the market, in a marketplace, and realize that there's a ton of value that's coming from people interacting, often in deeply social, often really personal ways in the workplace that is productive for everyone. And the thing we're protecting when we decide, I'm not going to take that just because I can get it, I'm going to ask first, the thing we're preserving is our ability to ask again later. So let me underscore that. Anytime we have the opportunity to collect data on what workers are doing, whether they're our full-time employees or consultants, we are introducing this moment of trust. the possibility that we might breach that trust, erode that trust, where workers start feeling like I need to take my work process, my exchange with my colleagues out of the line of sight of my employer. We're all losing. So what's that risk whenever a company decides I've got access to this data of these workers doing things, I'm just going to take it? They're literally risking their ability to draw from that productivity down the road. And the example I'll often give people is, think about how many people now have a little slide camera across their, or have a little slide panel across the camera on their laptops and computers. The main reason that exists is because many of us are really uncomfortable not knowing whether data is being collected on us or not. Think about the chilling effect of productivity in the workplace when people don't know if what they're doing is being observed or not. So it's a cost to all of us to take data that's just spewing everywhere because we think it might be valuable, and not see that the greater value is in preserving trust by not taking it without asking. We know empirically that it is a social process and a social output when we produce something creative, distinctly human. And so in those cases, there is no easy way to look at any of the data that's just constantly flowing around us as something other than real social exchange. Computer science and engineering is really organized around figuring out, by looking at the data that's just there, it really can't accomplish where we go next with artificial intelligence. So we will have to have people's agreement to participate in explaining their actions, reflecting on what they're doing. We will have to have these meaningful, deep agreements that say, I would like to learn what you're doing. And we're going to have to build out this sense of mutuality, is how I've been talking about it, of learning what does somebody want to achieve, whether it's in the workplace or in their own lives. And it will be on technologists to say, okay, I'll make that the priority, rather than I'll build something because I have a lot of data that might give me an insight. That's where we've been. I think the three things that HR directors and professionals could do to facilitate what could be a really amazing transition to unleashing capacity of workers everywhere is for them to be the vanguard, the stewards of protecting the human rights of all workers, to be unfettered, to be free of being surveilled in the workplace. And as HR professionals know, people do their best work when they're trusted. So that first order of business is they could be the ones who defend the right of workers to always control data about them and their exchanges in the workplace, in all settings, whether it's for full-time employees or for contractors. The second thing that they could bring to the table is their awareness that, we could certainly say it's millennials, I think it's much bigger than that, their awareness that there are workers now coming into the workplace who are not interested in staying in the same workplace for the rest of their careers. They want to learn new things. They want to imagine that this isn't the first stop or the third stop, but rather a new place to learn. And so they could be a part of recognizing that the value is not in investing and possessing a single employee. Certainly you want to recruit for who you need, but genuinely to be much more interested in helping them go where they go, helping them grow and to figure out where they should go next. They could pave the way for seeing that as a benefit to both the workers and to their firms. Not looking to cut the labor costs at their firm, but genuinely trying to enhance what kind of match is happening between the talent that might be needed in the moment and the capacity of people to be that talent for somebody else elsewhere. And then the third thing that I think HR professionals know already is that there are uneven playing fields here. And the role of HR in being able to say, we know that we see disparities in who is given an opportunity in this setting. What can they do to use this orientation to tasks and projects to say, I'm now licensed to go find diversity and inclusion? And not because it's a nice to have, it looks good for our firm, but because they know that that is precisely, that mix is what makes output really shine and exponentially amazing for firms. Like, firms die when they do the same thing over and over again. The best way of buffering against that is get a diverse team, get an inclusive team. Again, not because it's a nice thing to do for the workers, it is, but because you get better outcomes. That means they have to facilitate folks who have never interacted with each other before. So realizing that this world of work is going to increase the amount of bumping into difference. And that means it could be their role not to report after the fact bad things that happen, but literally to be saying, our job is to assume this is hard. There is nothing obvious about interacting and being able to have productive exchanges with people who are different from our own sense of identities, where we come from. So their job is to recognize we need more of that. It's not even just we need it, it's happening, and it will continue to happen as we organize around projects and tasks. So they're going to play an incredibly important role in saying, this has to be facilitated. This is not something that workers should just have to figure out for themselves, because in all cases, you know who carries that work? It's the person who is the most different. So their job is to make sure that everybody is aware that it is a collective effort, and really, the need for all of us to recognize how hard it is to see each other's value, and to not just be tolerant of each other's difference, but to see it as something that I'm going to gain from that exchange. But it should never be left to individuals to do on their own. And the whole point is, like, you've got to connect with people to be able to be productive in any social setting. And it's a privilege. It is a luxury, but it is a privilege to disconnect from people. And that should never be a place anybody feels comfortable occupying. They should recognize that, because that always comes at the cost of somebody else. Like, anytime you're disconnecting, you just pushed work onto someone else. So I think anybody who I feel this when anybody tells me they don't listen, answer email, all I can think is, yes, you do. And it's usually by somebody who you feel obligated and feel is more powerful than you. So that's a side note, but it's like, those moments of, like, tolerance is, it feels like an expression of unchecked privilege.